Silence can often be more painful than any insult in life. When those closest to you decide you're invisible, it's not with violence or rage, but rather with tactful, silent exclusion. This is the tale of a woman who gave her everything to her family, only to be informed she didn't belong at the most revered family event. They were unaware, however, that she held a legacy, a truth and a grace that went well beyond blood. This story is for you if you've ever felt alienated in your family. Don't forget to subscribe to Reddit Familial Tales if you find stories like this. Moving genuine voices rise above the familial silence there. Let me now transport you back to that day. I learned about the baptism on a Tuesday morning. I didn't receive an invitation. There was absolutely no phone call. I heard Ruth, my neighbor, talking loudly over the speaker at the grocery store about that big Brooks family event this Saturday. As I was folding clothes in the sunroom, I am a member of the Brooks household. My relatives mid-fold, my hands hesitated. On my lap lay a silky yellow baby onesie that I had impulsively purchased 3 months prior in the hopes of giving my grandson Elijah a charming present. His age was 6 months. Since his birth, I had not held him before phoning my daughter Elaine. I waited for an hour. I persuaded myself that all I wanted was to hear her voice, not to go fishing. Perhaps I could take a hint. However, her voice became clipped, distracted. "It's hectic," she remarked. "We're finalizing the guest list to ensure that it's intimate, you know." That was the end of it. The text mentions no time. No place I am certain that I can attend. A picture of the hand-stitched baptism gown was shared on Facebook by my son-in-law's sister 2 days later with the message, "Just blood relatives, just love." I'm not sure if the phrase or the exclusion struck me more strongly. Only blood relatives. I gazed at the text until it became hazy. I am Elaine's mother. I brought her up by myself. When she was 4 years old, her father passed away and I had to start our lives over. Through nocturnal fevers, I kept her close. I cleaned houses in the morning and worked nights at the cafe. To give her seconds, I skipped meals. To pay for her piano tuition, I wore shoes from a secondhand store. But here I was. Somehow a granny deleted, I sat at my kitchen table and waited for the quiet to descend. There was no need to express it verbally. No one invited me. This was not always the case. We were close for a while. Elaine married into a family that appeared to be obsessed with perfection, wealth, and appearance. The Winslows. They weren't exactly mean. They are simply polished. The surface is smooth. Elaine started polishing off the rough edges of her history, beginning with me somewhere along the way. My speech differs from theirs. I don't wear their clothes. I continue to garden in secondhand jeans and work part-time at the library, and that doesn't seem to fit in anymore. Nevertheless, I spent that weekend baking cookies. I placed the baptism present, little breath-soft knit booties, into a tiny blue box. I knotted them with string after wrapping them in tissue. I promised myself that I would simply drop them off at the church with a letter. There would be no drama involved. However, when I got there, a woman in heels stopped me at the door. "Only family," she stated. I blinked. "I am family," I replied softly. She looked over her shoulder at the still chapel. Then she smiled pityingly and leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I apologize. They were quite obvious. Only blood relatives are present." She pivoted behind her, the door clicked shut. As the bells started to ring, I was standing on the church steps with my present in hand. Light flowed across the sidewalk in subdued hues through the stained glass. I turned and left after standing there for a little while longer beyond the vehicles. Beyond the well-kept yard, I walked past those who remained completely unaware of my presence. I finally relaxed my fingers when I got to the bottom of the slope. I gently dropped the box into the garbage can next to the pavement. I refrained from crying. I believed I might. However, I didn't. Suddenly, the pain extended beyond simply missing the baptism. Everything was at stake. Elaine had seen everything I had. She now concluded that I wasn't based on everything. The pictures started arriving the following day. The church steps were lined with smiling faces. Elaine was dressed in a sophisticated cream gown. Her spouse, looking dapper in a navy suit, is also present. Elijah, a baby, was squinting against the sun while wearing the baptism garb. The Winslows were all around them, laughing and holding hands. 3 generations. My eyes weren't in any of them. I panned in. One picture showed Elaine's hand gently resting on Marianne, her husband's mother's arm. It's lovely how involved you try to be considering your circumstances. A woman once told me over Thanksgiving. What circumstances meant is still unclear to me. Perhaps it was a euphemism for not one of us, widowed young, or lower income. I stared at the picture until the screen went dark while I sat at my kitchen table with my phone next to a half-empty mug of chamomile tea. Then I got up and went to the closet in my bedroom. Stuffed in the back behind a pile of winter blankets was a photo album. It was one of those large leather-bound books with peeling corners and a cracked spine. It had been years since I had opened it. It contained memories that no one else seemed to be able to recall. Elaine, who was 6 years old, was smiling, even though she had lost her front teeth. Elaine receives her ribbon from the science fair. Standing next to me in my best secondhand navy dress is Elaine in her high school graduation gown. Back then, I was thinner. My mouth's lines hadn't yet solidified. I ran my fingertips over a single photo of Elaine as a toddler sleeping on my chest. Her tiny hand gripped my collar as if it were the most important thing in the world. How does such a love fade away? The doorbell rang. I blinked the sting out of my eyes as I jolted. My neighbor Ruth was standing there with a container of lasagna when I answered the door. "Look at the photos," she added quietly. "Are you all right?" Yes, that was what I wanted to say. I wanted to act indifferent, however, the words failed to form. Rather, I motioned her inside and we sat at my tiny kitchen table. 2 elderly people sitting side by side. She didn't inquire further when she saw that my hands were shaking and that I hadn't touched the lasagna. She just handed me a napkin. I looked at my phone once again later that night. Elaine didn't leave a message. However, I received a notification that my granddaughter Ava had uploaded a narrative. Elaine's first spouse had a stepdaughter named Ava. Ava was 17 years old at the time of her birth. The girl is quiet and perceptive. I gave it a tap. After the ceremony, someone recorded a video behind the chapel. Elijah was seen on camera in his father's embrace. Then it panned in on the visitors who were laughing and chatting. Then she said, "They didn't invite her," over the microphone. A pause. Then there was a softer whisper. She was outside. I noticed her, that was the end of it. 10 seconds lost. However, my breath felt trapped in my throat. Ava caught my eye. She saw it shouldn't have made a difference. However, it did. When your own daughter establishes a boundary between you and her family, even the slightest hint of recognition can become a lifeline. I didn't get any sleep that evening. This was not due to anger, but because the thought of how invisible I had become kept coming to mind. I felt invisible in their lives, not just at the baptism. In their family portrait, I appeared as a ghost. They removed a shadow from the picture. Nevertheless, I was the one who had set the stage for their beginnings. Elaine had forgotten how I used to sell my wedding ring to pay for her college textbooks, and how I used to sit at her bedside with cold cloths. However, I did. My body recoiled. I remembered my calmness. That silence was suddenly becoming more pronounced. A week went by. Then another. I have yet to receive a call. Don't apologize, they never even opened the present, so there was no thank you. I navigated my days with slowness, heaviness, and a sense of submersion. I used hands that moved based on muscle memory to shelve books at the library. The only people I spoke to at home were the ancient clock on the wall that ticked a little too loudly, the kettle and the cat that occasionally walked through my backyard. Then I heard it again one Sunday afternoon as the sun was setting behind the maples. The doorbell. Elaine was standing there when I opened the door. My heart jumped, if I may use that phrase. It didn't. As usual, she looked polished. She had blown out her hair. Her makeup was subtle yet flawless. I was aware that the pale blue coat she wore cost more than my previous monthly mortgage. Elijah, wearing a small cable-knit jumper, wriggled and cooed in her arms. She said, "Hello, Mom. No, Mama. No, I didn't miss you." Simply say hello, Mom. Daniel, her husband, was hovering on the porch behind her, browsing through his phone as if this visit were something he did in between errands. "Maybe we could stop by," Elaine said hastily. For a minute only, I moved out of the way, silent. They entered as visitors. Their eyes scanned the room as if it had changed, as if my house had grown unfamiliar. With Elijah bouncing slightly in her arms, Elaine remarked, "I just thought you might like to see him." I carefully sat down on the couch's edge. They handed me the infant as a formality, treating it like a box to check. And yet everything sharp inside me softened when I glanced down at Elijah. I felt warmth for the first time in weeks as his small palm wrapped around my finger in a questioning manner. Elaine's nose was on him. However, his eyes were fresh, wondering, unambiguous. Nothing touched it. I closed my eyes and embraced him, allowing his head to rest on my shoulder. I let his heartbeat soothe me. The silence was soon broken by Daniel's voice. He stated, "We're considering moving closer to his parents. It would help with childcare, and they have more space." Elaine gave a nod. "They've been really helpful." Simply put it, makes sense, the remarks weren't mean. However, their impact was profound, encouraging. The list didn't even include me. Then, wiping invisible lint from her sleeve, Elaine got to her feet. "We should get going now. I just wanted to drop by. Say hello." She pulled Elijah from my arms. She turned, but she was unaware that his fingers were reaching for me. They didn't both. Elaine turned momentarily as they re-entered the porch and said almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and thanks for the gift." It took us a while to open it, but it was really lovely, nice. He treated me as if I were a distant neighbor's card. I saw their vehicle leave the driveway and vanish from view. I then took a seat. Still, until one by one the streetlights blink. I didn't understand something had changed inside of me until the following morning. I was the one who had stepped over the boundary. Not them. I had stooped into silence for so long. I had sunk into thankfulness for the scraps. I was filled with hope that they would remember me. But now I felt exhausted. Not upset, I'm simply tired of constantly needing to prove my worth to those who have already decided to exclude me. Ava knocked on my door at the end of March. She had never visited alone. As though Ava may learn something from me. Elaine always maintained a courteous wall around her stepdaughter's encounters with me. There was a hint of traditional humility in her demeanor. Perhaps it's a mark of struggle, but she was there. She was standing in my doorway, holding a paper bag that was crinkling in her arms, a school backpack and a knit beanie. She said, "I brought banana bread." From the beginning, I blinked. "Is your mother aware of your presence?" A shrug. "She's not at home. Elijah is with them." Additionally, I had questions, inquiries. The word affected me. It reached into the silent space that had begun to close in on itself inside of me. I moved out of the way. She entered with a sense of belonging. She took off her shoes at the door without any prompting. She approached the kitchen as if it were familiar, but it wasn't. We sat at the table with thick, still warm slices of bread and drink. At first, she was silent. She simply glanced around silently, taking in everything. The pot holders are made with crochet. The small bookcase was also present. A faded picture of Elaine as a child stuck to the refrigerator. "I saw you at the baptism." Ava finally said. She spoke steadily, yet softly. "I observed how they glanced straight past you." I remained silent. She looked down and said, "They told people it was only blood relatives. I'm also not blood. I didn't anticipate landing so hard." Ava went on, "They let me in because it looks good. A blended family. Like their own stepdaughter, but it's all a show. Since my mother is no longer with me, I occasionally feel like an outsider. They are trying to include." I delicately stroked her wrist as I reached across the table. "You are not a substitute." Then her eyes filled with tears. "Neither are you." And there it was. The recognition came from the girl who was sitting in the back, the one nobody saw. They only utilized it when it was convenient for them. For a while, we sat in silence. Then she posed the unexpected inquiry, "Why don't you defend yourself?" I gave her a look. And I was honest with someone for the first time in years. I used to believe that waiting your turn was a necessary part of love. I believed they would change their mind if I continued to be kind. that dignity would overshadow any rejection. However, it might not. It might not have happened. Ava was silent, reflecting. Then she posed a question that caused my throat to constrict. May I visit here occasionally? Only to converse. I gave a nod. You are welcome at any time. She grinned. It wasn't a showy grin, it's a genuine one. The light was uncertain, a little tilted but bright. She turned on the porch as she was leaving and said, You know you ought to have been up there. Not her Marion, no. She abruptly left a trail of grace in her wake. I pulled the old photo album from the shelf once more that evening. This time, however, I also took out a fresh scrapbook with crisp blank pages. I also wrote a date on the first page. Ava's visit was scheduled for March 28th. Should they cease incorporating me into their narratives, I would then begin maintaining my records. It was a slow spring that year. The forsythia flowered first, creating bright, wild bursts of gold in a yard that no one visited. Still, I cut them back old routines. Even when no one was looking, I still thought it was important to keep things tended. Thereafter, Ava visited every other week. She half ignored us while we sat in silence, sometimes with banana bread, and other times with only her math assignment and earbuds I didn't pry. She didn't ever perform. The silence between us was soothing. Then one Friday, she showed up holding a tiny envelope. She whispered softly, I found this. She pointed to the junk drawer in the kitchen. I don't believe I was meant to witness it. She slid it across the table. Elaine wrote my name in her calligraphy on the front. She never sent a letter. At first, I didn't reach for it. My stomach turned over. Such letters were important. These were the kind of letters that, once read, left a lasting impression on the reader. You don't have to open it. Ava said, glancing at me. I simply didn't want it to go away. That's where she left it, gave me a cheek kiss. Then the kiss vanished. I needed 3 hours to gather my courage. I finally opened it after the radio had gone silent and I had finished the dishes. I read it cover to cover while seated at the table and illuminated by the antique pendant light. Mom, I'm aware that I offended you. Now that I am a mom, I have been reflecting on what it means to be a mother, even though I know you won't trust anything I say at this point. Additionally, I keep seeing glimpses of you. When Elijah cries, I hold him in this manner. When I'm cleaning up his bottles, I unconsciously hum. I didn't intend to interrupt you. I have no idea when it began. Perhaps I became weary of thinking I owed you everything. Perhaps I felt guilty for not being able to give you more because you didn't fit nicely in the world I moved into. It was simpler to act as though you were the one who avoided contact. I apologize, I have no idea how to solve it. I might never solve it. However you are on my mind, I am thinking about you more than you may realize. Elaine, there was no reference to a date. The return address was not provided. The final line is the only one to be returned. Slowly, I folded the letter. I touched the paper as if blinking too forcefully would cause it to melt. It didn't improve the situation. However, it caused something to come loose. Not pardoning, I'm not ready to forgive just yet. But sorrow, the kind that you only notice when the door is silently locked from the inside rather than slammed. I took a seat that evening and composed my letter. I did not address it to Elaine. To Ava, I don't expect loyalty from you. You're still figuring out your place. However I see you, you lack your mother's barriers, but you do have her sharpness. You're not a stand-in. You're not invisible. Visit us at any time. Someone who can see you clearly, and tea is always available. I put a lid on it. I put it near the door. She would return shortly. I heard Marion Winslow's voice the following day as I was organizing the library's bookshelves. Crisp cut, known. She was chatting with the chief librarian at the front desk, requesting donation receipts and fumbling with tax papers. At first, she didn't notice me. She turned, though, and our gazes locked. Her face froze as if she had entered a haunted area she hadn't anticipated. She smiled thinly and replied, I didn't know you still worked here. I answered, part-time, just like Seoul's libraries still require dusting. She laughed tightly. All right, small world. You looked lovely at the baptism from what I heard, she said after pausing. It was there, the brink, the reminder. I softly stated, I wasn't at the baptism. I was outside. Her smile wavered. She was aware, of course, I apologize. She finally said it wasn't real, though. Such apologies intended for delight rather than cleanliness lingered in the air like perfume. I said, You don't have to be. I learned everything I needed to know that day. I then returned my attention to my shelf. She hovered for a time behind me, then departed. I let out a slow, steady breath. I was not pleased with the occasion, but because I had drawn a line for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch either. It was 3 weeks later. The days grew slightly longer, and the lilacs along the fence line started to bloom. Even so, Ava stopped by. We never discussed the letter again, but she gave me a tighter hug more tightly. In a house her family had attempted to unwritten, she felt as though she was securing herself to something sturdy. I came home from the grocery store one Thursday afternoon to see a cream-colored envelope stuck in my mailbox. This time it's not handwritten. It's a printed label official. Before I opened it, I brought it inside, put the bags down, and looked at it for a long time. It was a request. Daniel and Elaine Winslow, I kindly encourage you to. The celebration of Elijah James Winslow's first birthday. The place their house. The date is in 2 weeks. The list of guests has been excluded. At the bottom, however, was a scrawled note. We would love to have you, Mom, if you're open to it. Actually, 3 times I read it again. There was no apology. The door wasn't open. However, it was something. And I didn't feel pressured to say yes for the first time. With the invitation in front of me, I sat at the table and decided what to do. I didn't intend to pursue them. I refused to stand awkwardly in the corner and chase crumbs while Marian engaged in patronizing small talk. However, I would choose Elijah. This also applies to the young child who had silently supported me in the darkness. In my scenario, that person was no longer invisible. The day of the celebration was exceptionally warm. I donned my favorite pair of flats and a delicate lilac blouse. I pulled my hair back in a braid, more for practicality than style. Ava waited for me at the front entrance as if she had anticipated my arrival. Her eyes were beaming as she said, You look good. You appear to be yourself. The house was immaculate inside. Hidden speakers hummed quiet jazz as caterers in black polos passed around little finger snacks. I received a courteous reception. However, the reception was not particularly warm. Elijah was already in Marian's arms, bouncing like a prize. Elaine's countenance shifted from astonishment to something unreadable when she caught sight of me from the other side of the room. She hurried over and gave me a one-arm embrace. She said, I'm so happy you came. I gave a nod. You failed to bring a present. She continued looking at my hands. I gave a small smile. Not a box-fitting one. Elaine's eyes blinked, but remained silent. I moved to the room's edge near the bookcase and observed the people interacting. I laughed. Toasted Ava showed up behind me with 2 platters. She presented me with a platter filled with crackers and strawberries. Everyone here believes Marian is the grandmother. She continued, dropping her voice. I remained silent. She looked at Elijah on the other side of the room and said, But he knows. He is aware infants are capable of feeling things, who genuinely loves them, who waits outside the church despite being prohibited entry. With a constricted throat, I faced her. Ava, thank you. She gave a shrug. I did not say it on your behalf. I said it for him. Later, as the cake was presented and everyone began to sing, I noticed Elijah's wide, inquisitive eyes as they scanned the room, shocked by the commotion. Then he noticed me. His small arms reached out toward the other side of the room beyond. Marian beyond. Elaine, this is directed towards me. There was no silence in the room. Nobody let out a gasp. The scene wasn't from a movie. However, I took note. Ava did the same. She looked into my eyes, grinned through her lashes, and muttered, The whole story has never been blood. I suddenly remembered something I had forgotten. Invitations aren't what legacy is about. It has to do with impression. What about the young boy? He had mine already. I got a new tablecloth the next week. It was simple, made of soft ivory cotton with a faded floral hem, but it brought back memories of spring Sundays when Elaine was still a little child, and everything seemed to be starting over. Like my mother used to do, I ironed it slowly, pressing out each crease as if in prayer. I then arranged the table I have secured one spot out of 3. Ava occupied one spot. One was left uncovered. Not because I thought Elaine would show up. However, I had grown tired of leaving chairs unfilled due to my pain. In quiet, I now left them open. Ava came with tulips that Saturday. Without saying much, she put them in a jar and asked if I wanted music or simply silence. Quiet was our choice. We discussed her plans over toasted bread and soup, college applications, perhaps psychology, perhaps writing. She was still unsure she was not required to be. In a way that made me feel proud she was her person. She discovered the scrapbook after dessert, the one I had initiated following the baptism. "May I make a contribution?" she inquired. 1-year-old Elijah extended with both arms as she took a picture from her phone and emailed it to my printer. She was not asking for a camera, a cake, or a gift. "This is directed towards me." She wrote a caption underneath and adhered it to the middle of a fresh page. He knew. For a long time, we both gazed at it, uttering no words. Then Ava asked, "Do you feel bad about it?" I pondered for a long time. I stirred my tea. I observed the steam rising and falling. I said, "I regret shrinking." I made an effort to occupy less space for a long time. I made an effort to be less noticeable, less loud and more true to myself. I believed they would let me stay. If I was quiet enough, modest enough, and nice enough. "They didn't," she added. "No," I replied. However, I stayed anyhow in my manner. Ava raised her head. I believe that's why I continued to visit. I grabbed her hand as I reached across the table. I said, "You didn't just show up. You observed." That's more courageous than most. I stood motionless for a while after opening the window next to the sink in the morning. A bird's melody floated in. The scent of damp earth filled the air. In the distance, one could hear a child's laughter. Additionally, I no longer felt like a ghost. I am not a burden. She was not a stand-in. The list included every woman. My job was to tell stories. When everyone else needed to forget their origins, this spirit remained grounded. They had attempted to remove me, but the memory of love was longer than that of rejection, and the legacy returns home. Always, I appreciate you listening to this tale. If it touched you even in a small way, please consider becoming a Reddit Family Tales subscriber. We tell real-life tales of quiet fortitude, tenacity, and the kind of healing that transforms everything, but doesn't often garner media attention. You're not by yourself. Your story is important too.